Welcome to the Monsters of Fantasy. This was written, produced, recorded, and edited by me, Shawn McCarter. Monsters of Fantasy is a production in which I will explore the truly horrific side of the fantasy world known as Dungeons and Dragons. There are content warnings in the show notes below. Episode 3: The Earth Elemental.
Nico, I must say, with your absence we have been maintaining progress. Also, thank you again for letting me know you can, in fact, hear me. And also, I don't think I'm being too tight. But as you requested, I'll ease myself into the story. It's a bit disconcerting knowing that you can immediately hear me if you wanted to. Does that mean you're listening to me right now? You know, that would have been the perfect moment to do one of your spells to drop in, or anything. Statement by Dask Belak regarding the Earth Elemental. To explain how I got here, I have to go back to the beginning. I had a rough upbringing, but everyone in Voron does, you know? Well, everyone I knew, at least. I didn't know my parents and never cared to. I was in and out of local orphanages until the age of 12, at which point I had grown too old to ever be adopted, so I ran away and made a living on the streets. Honestly, I liked it that way. I wanted to be alone. I stole food off of whatever vendors I could sneak past, and I would hide in abandoned homes or shops. You'd be surprised how many residents in big cities don't know what lurks underneath their homes. It was here, at an early age, I started to love the Underdark. You have no idea how large the sewer systems are to a massive city. Almost all the roads you walk above contain some twisting or turning network of tunnels that carry all the waste you don't want and disposes of it. And down there with that waste you don't want is an entire world of thieves. I know it sounds like I'm rambling, but I want you to understand, I'm not like the others you found down here, okay? If you ask them for a statement, I want you to know that I am better than them. I spent my entire childhood honing my skills in that underground. I perfected my abilities to hide and lurk when I needed, and to strike and kill when it wasn't. The years went by and I found myself frequenting a small shack on the southern side of Voron. If you come by it from the front, it looks like a simple apothecary, and if you enter, you'll meet a warm, elderly elven woman who calls herself Elle. But if you listen very carefully beneath the floorboards, you may hear the shuffling of hushed voices moving stolen magic items. I won't go too much into our relationship, but she found me at a young age, and I instantly knew she understood the world we were a part of. The Underworld. Another society made up of all the waste that no one wanted. She didn't take care of me, everyone had to take care of themselves. But if she needed me for a job, well, I couldn't help but lend her a hand. And she did pay handsomely. It was supposed to be another normal job. There was a good lead about a mage's tower that was recently undiscovered through a network of tunnels. Told me I would meet up with hers about a 3-day journey north of here. She said there was a specific item she was looking for, though. A set of armor rumored to be made of ancient elven silk and imbued with their spells. She said it would look almost like a long flowing cloak of black and green, and showed me a small sketch of what it should look like. Normally on jobs like this, she would tell me to be careful about anyone else hunting for the same artifact, but she assured me that we were going to be the only ones who knew about it. That the only people who knew of this discovery were within her network. The travel there was perfectly fine. I had no problem keeping quiet and hiding on my own. And it did help that Elle wasn't wrong about it being secluded. The spot she had sent me to was in the middle of nowhere. I hadn't seen a single house, let alone a village, the entire last day of the trek. The only thing telling me I was going in the right directions were the occasional marks and notches made into the trees by the other members of Elle's network. I followed the path deep into the woods until I noticed the smell of horses on the air. I must be getting close, I thought to myself, and started to stealth my way up to the meeting point. Stood in front of me was a large opening to this cave. However, before the 30-foot wide opening descended into darkness, I saw a young female tiefling. She had ruby red skin and long horns that curled on the sides of her face. She had so many piercings in her horns and face I began to lose count, and instead I watched as she seemed to be playing a soft tune to keep herself busy. The sound was emanating from the small stringed instrument that she held up to her shoulder with one hand, and lightly plucked it with the other one. Strapped to her waist was a rather ornate-looking rapier, the hilt of which seemed to have pearls lining up to its gold finishing. Compared to the rest of her outfit, it stuck out drastically, so I figured it was probably stolen. Sitting across from her was the short dwarven woman who went by the name of Tish. I had met Tish and worked with her once before, and I've seen her around the tunnels since. I'm assuming Elle kept using her more than some of the others because it was hard to find a cleric who'd be willing to use their powers for unlawful reasons. She carried a warhammer at her side that was ablaze with the sigil to Moradin. Other than that, she just wore a normal set of chainmail that didn't affiliate itself to any nation. I sat there watching from the tree line low and silently, thinking how easy they had let me sneak up on them, and how easily I could attack them from the shadows, and they'd never know. However, I knew what was accustomed, and I knew how not to get shot if I didn't want to be. So from the tree line I let loose a low whistle, one specifically designed by Elle for this moment. I waited, and in unison both Tish and this tiefling whistled back the response. Pleasantries happen, but let's be honest, if you're in this line of work, you're probably not the chummiest fellow. Me and Tish shook hands and laughed slightly about teaming up once again. I then let Abaddana, as she called herself, introduce herself to me. I remember she seemed really nervous, and was telling us that this was her first real job. I asked her what her skill sets were because at least with Tish I knew what to expect. Don't do anything too stupid and she'll heal you. Do something too stupid and she'll heal you but with a charge. She told me she was support, and then shrugged her shoulders more like a question than anything. She stepped in close and then slightly pulled her rapier out of its sheath. And I remember it was so impeccably clean, and the metal seemed to glow from within inside the dim-lit cave. She said that when supporting doesn't work, she does a fair bit of stabbing instead. It was at that moment I felt something slowly sliding up my cloak. That bitch really did try to steal from me. Quick as a flash, I had the tip of her thin tail pinned to the ground. She narrowed her jet-black eyes at me, and I pulled the dagger from her tail. I smiled at her. Nice try, darling. And I meant it. I liked that she wanted to try and steal from me, because I wanted them to know I was faster, sneakier, and more clever than they would ever be. I started walking deeper into the cave towards our target, letting the other two follow me. Now, the reason I went first wasn't just because of some vain attempt at showing off, it was because of my very keen eyes. You see, I grew up in dark tunnels just like the ones I was descending, and I refused to believe that either of them could do better than I. Whether they were upset about it, I knew not, because I was quickly making my way down the tunnel of the cave, and it was completely dark. But thanks to whichever bastard of a parent was an elf, I could still see, unlike any other normal human. I saw before me a 20-foot wide crackled cave that led down deeper into the earth. The ceiling gave us enough room that we didn't have to worry about it keeping us cramped. I knew El's men rediscovered this network of caves, but the work wasn't that of a dwarf. This tunnel had to be dug out of from arcane means, which was good for two reasons. Whatever path was continuing down before us inevitably led to something. The other was that we didn't really have to worry about much of a collapse happening behind us. This did, however, come with one negative, the likelihood that whatever created the tunnels also set up traps to keep it hidden. And if it was indeed a wizard's tower built underground thousands of years ago, then I had to be sure I was the one looking out for the traps. Tish had struck a torch after not too long, even though I didn't need it, and after another 30 minutes of silently creeping through, it seemed that Tish and Abaddana had decided that this was no longer a stealth mission, but rather an explorative one, and started chatting. It should be no surprise to you that I don't care to chat with others, so, doing my part in the mission, I went ahead a bit to scout out the path, while they chatted behind me. The journey deep into the earth, however, started to go a bit longer than I would have liked. The cold and yellowish gray limestone around us had long changed into a deep black rock, and we were moving fast. I gather we had already traveled through this cave for over an hour. The slowly descending slope had become more slanted. Not enough to fall over or anything, but enough that with each step I felt the soft pull of gravity tempting me to run deeper into the dark. I started to slow myself because the tunnel angle had now shifted my perspective, that past my 60 feet of vision I couldn't help but feel like I was about to fall into the darkness. I now realized that was the point, and it wasn't my imagination that the floor was getting steeper, because behind me I heard the quickened footsteps of the others. Abaddana, not paying enough attention, sped past me another 20 feet, slowing herself down to a halt, but it was too late. She had run past a set of glyphs that I must admit I did not notice before, and as she did so, the cave burst into a flash of arcane light. Tish stopped just behind me, and we all watched as Abaddana's face glue with fear. Because my eyes had just been adjusted to the darkness of the cave, I was temporarily blinded by the flash. The next few seconds I was in true darkness. I kept squinting and rubbing my eyes, and slowly my vision started to come back to me. But before I could truly make out my surroundings, I felt a large rush of wind pass my body. At the same moment, I heard the cries of that tiefling echo down the cave into emptiness. Then I heard the loud crash of stone slamming into earth. Through the settling of dust and Tish's faint torchlight, I saw this lumbering mass of earth. It didn't have any body, per se. It was just this shifting and moving mass of rock and dirt. It swung protrusions from its body that looked like limbs around wildly, spraying me with dirt and pebbles. This mass of dirt turned to me and looked at me. It had no eyes or mouth, but as it shifted the round lump of clay that rested on top of its body, I knew it was looking at me. It opened its mouth, which it did so by splitting an open slit, which revealed a serrated row of rock. However, very briefly I saw into its throat, and I could see what looked like to be molten steel, that of a forge. It then shouted at us in a deep, guttural growl. It sounded so ancient, so primal, whatever language it spoke, it felt so raw. The entire ground shook around me as this thing was shouting. I guess the shock caught us all off guard because none of us reacted as it lifted its massive arms into the air and then slammed them one after another into the prone Abaddana. I saw her body shatter into the ground as the first mass of earth collided, and then I saw her eyes go wide in shock. But before she could get up, another arm slammed into her side and I heard her ribcage crunch. I guess Tish still had a good head on her shoulders because she immediately hurled herself across the cavern and started to pray to her gods for Abaddana. This thing was clearly looking at the two and seemed to be distracted. I took this as an opportunity to deal a lethal blow and flung myself at what I thought was its head and pulled out my dagger. I tried slitting its throat, but I felt my knife slip through sand, and as I dug, it finally drug across and hit hard stone. I pulled my knife back out, but I saw the dirt and rocks shifting to cover up the thin cut. I heard Abaddana shouting behind me to just kill this fucker, something I intended to do. But as I began to lift the dagger to strike again, I felt my stomach lurch as the creature underneath me vanished. It seemed that all the rock and earth below me just got absorbed into the cave floor. I scrambled to my feet, and I was looking around frantically for the creature. I didn't have to look long, though, because behind the other two, I saw the earth erupt from the ground behind them. And with one massive swing, it buried Tish, and I heard her cry out in pain as her torch blinked out. My eyes trying to quickly adjust, I saw another large limb crush Abaddana. I couldn't see if she was moving or not, but I started running at the creature. Tish was climbing free of the dirt, coughing up blood. She cursed the creature in Dwarvish, and her eyes began to glow a deep emerald green. At the same time, behind the creature's back, a green node of light started to grow rapidly, engulfing this large mound. When the light faded, the creature glimmered in a sickly green glow. I slid forward with my dagger and thrusted it into its underside. After the blade sank through about 2 inches of settlement, though, I felt the tip of the dagger bounce off something hard, sending a numbing shock up my arm. I was completely useless. My attacks weren't doing nearly enough to this thing. This was supposed to be a scouting mission, maybe a stealthy one. She sent me with Tish, and while I appreciated her warmth, she couldn't really hurt this thing. Abaddana was already unconscious, and there I was, hurling myself even further into a bad situation, instead of running. I think that monster started laughing at us, because it opened its cutout of a mouth, and then the clacking sound of rock started coming from its throat as I swear its clay face twisted into a smile. It then brought down both hands hard. I tried rolling out of the way, but as my vision turned, I felt my shoulder get crushed by the driving force of sharp rocks and gravel. I heard the sound of rushing air and flinched, bracing myself for the impact. But all I heard was the sound of something getting hit. Hard. I struggled to pull myself up. I quickly looked at the two bodies lying on the ground. I couldn't tell if Tish was still alive, as she was mostly buried underneath the earth, and all I saw was a severely crumpled head poking out. Abaddana was breathing, though, but I knew I couldn't help her. I couldn't carry her, and my shoulder was broken, and she was probably dead anyway. I cut my losses and started sprinting as fast as I could, though, through the cave and back up where we came from. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running faster and faster. The last thing I heard behind me was the guttural echo of the creature bouncing off the walls of the caves behind me. The last thing I saw was the face of the smiling earth gliding effortlessly below me as it reached through the ground. It wrapped its makeshift hand around my head, and then everything went black. Nico, I can't help but feel this one was targeted at me some way. First the tiefling hatred, let alone a red tiefling bard. Come on, it can't be a coincidence. Well, it could have been. But then it seems that this statement you took off a corpse. I mean, I know it's capable to speak with the dead through ritualistic spells. Had an old friend that used to do it quite a bit, actually. But this was an entire story, not a few simple answers, Nico. Not that there's anything wrong with it per se, just it's creepy. It felt like I was living his last moments. Sorry, right. We verified a few things with this statement thanks to the notes you attached in your earlier researching and cataloging. I sent Daisy and Luna to the old excavation site, but like you stated in your previous notes, it seemed to be a total loss. You know, Cade once said it was about time the boys had the castle to themselves. But don't think we just partied. No, Nico, we were working. Specifically doing research on the tiefling that was mentioned in the story. She came up again in 2 other statements. We can't tell the time frame just yet, and if she's alive or not. That actually brings up a good point, though. Why is nothing here dated, Nico? There's no reference for time or anything. But I guess that's why you hired us, to help you organize and do this stuff the right way. While you're off doing I have no idea what, it's been 3 weeks since we started, and it feels weird that you aren't here. I mean, we're all getting paid and doing our work, so I guess it doesn't matter. The Earth Elemental. Now, originally, Nico, you said to just file all the elementals under one clump. But then you said I have full control over how I record these entries, and I'm going to exercise my authority here. We have several statements regarding the different variants, and we have more than enough variances between them that it only seemed fitting. Elementals come from the elemental plane. These different dimensions house beings made of pure energy. It is believed that a lot of our druidic powers come from these pure forms of energy, and it's been proven that a lot of small creatures, like the now extinct fire toad, possess the same arcane energy that are derived from these planes. But let's stay focused. These places consist of fire, water, air, and earth. There are lesser territories that have formed and housed life forms along the borders of these dimensions, causing rare occurrences of like a ice or magma elemental. The elementals are not only sentient, but very powerful and destructive creatures. However, they aren't advanced enough to cross into our world on their own. They are almost always brought here through arcane means, usually very strong ones. My guess is that our Miss Abaddana had activated a glyph that triggered some spell that contracted the elemental and pulled him from his native earth plane into ours. Physiology. The earth elemental consists of, well, earth. It's quite literally a living and moving mound of rock, mud, and dirt. They do typically contain a core that pulses throughout them. This is their heart, essentially, and is the purest form of energy you could ever find. That's actually how to distinguish an elemental from a golem. Golems are man-made constructs that are imbued with magical energy to move and exist. Elementals are the wind. They are the earth. It isn't some spell animating them. It is living, breathing rock. Because of this, different variances in dirt and stone and earth elemental appearance can vary drastically. One common theme, however, to the creatures is that most of them have adopted bipedal forms, making them look like large, clumpy, man-like mounds of earth. Because of this, it goes without saying, but its entire essence can very well be made of stone, making it extremely hard to damage. Weaknesses and resistances. Because of its construction, of course it's just naturally harder to damage this thing. However, through our extensive research, it seems that the elementals from the Earth domain are completely immune to shockwave-based attacks. Anything that might cause a concussive blast of thunder throughout a creature will render no effect on the Earth elemental. And as our departed Dask showed us, the creature is very resistant to attacks made from normal weaponry. If you wish to fight such a creature, you'll need weapons touched by magic or be gifted by sorcery yourself. But even with sorcery, your options are limited, because the creature is quite literally the living embodiment of energy and has no organic matter. It can't be poisoned, nor can it be put to sleep, paralyzed, or petrified. Cadwin, why did you write that? Who would try to turn a stone creature into stone? Other than that, the creature is susceptible to spells and effects that capitalize off of its very low intelligence. Unlike the other creatures that we've cataloged up until now, it is susceptible to magic. Just stay away from spells that damage organic tissue or spells that attempt to challenge the creature's massive strength. That brings us to abilities. The Earth Elemental has one ability, and subsequently one attack. The elemental can become one with the ground to effortlessly glide through the very earth itself without disturbing it. It becomes one with the terrain, allowing it to traverse the battlefield in unexpected ways. It will then use this strategic advantage along with its size and strength to corner its victim and then slam them with massive clumps of earth. While it isn't the most thought-out approach from the different monsters we've seen, we can't deny that it was effective. Well, Nico, that wraps up our third entry. You only gave me guidance and preparations for these three, and you haven't returned. Look, I know you hear this, Nico. I'm just worried I'm not holding up to your standards. So if you have a request or any pointers, feel free to send some arcane message to relay that information.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share it with your friends and family so they too can experience the horror of D&D. Today's episode was inspired by my home campaign and features characters inspired by my players. Elementals are strong and scary, but next week we'll be looking at something more agile. Join me for episode 4, The Displacer Beast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.